Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world.
Becky was a 44-year-old mom. She had an older daughter that was already married. She had one that was getting ready to graduate from high school. Then had a son who was 13 years old. Becky wasn't feeling too well, and she decided to go to her doctor. She thought it was her, the change, as she wrote, that her body was going through as she was getting ready to start menopause. In reality, Becky, at the age of 42, was pregnant. So she goes to her doctor, and her doctor says, well, you need to go see your OBGYN. You're pregnant. And so she does, and then she goes, and she does, and she goes through some tests. And after she goes through these tests, the doctor comes in and sits down with her and says, I've got something we need to talk about. I'm probably still not going to say this name right, but I'll give it a try. Trisomy 18 is a disease that your baby has. More than likely, your baby is going to die. He's either going to be deformed, have issues, be stillborn. But the odds are against you. I recommend you have an abortion. So Becky, who was a strong Christian at the time, and still is, she was struggling. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to proceed. She was worried about her health and the health of this baby that's inside of her. And so she started reaching out to different people, and she reached out to the Crisis Pregnancy Center down in South Carolina. And they said, well, you need to talk to Dr. Robert Jackson. We got to see Robert Jackson the other week. He was up here in Mooresville for a dinner, and he told this story. When he tells this story, he talks about sitting down with Becky and talking with her and talking about abortion and this decision that she has to make. He said, we sat there and cried. Both of us cried because we didn't know what to do. But he read the scriptures and the importance of life, and that God created that life within Becky, and the importance of her doing the right thing. So Becky struggled, and she struggled. She knew that this was going to be really hard. Her husband, who was unemployed, didn't work. She was supporting the family. All these issues were piling upon Becky, and she was struggling to make the right decision. But in her faith, she knew she had to make the right decision, and that was to give birth to this little baby. So over time, as the 9 months goes on, she is struggling the whole time, fearful of what's going to happen to this baby that's growing inside of her. And as it gets to the point where Becky gives birth to this little baby, the baby is alive. Becky gets to sit there and hold that baby for 2+ hours in her arms and tell that baby that she loves him. The baby passed away. And you think about this, you think that this could have been avoided. This could have been aborted. But she had the opportunity to hold what God gave her in her hands, and that was life that He created within her womb. It was not an accident. It was not a mistake. It was beauty that God created. And when you think about that, think about holding a child just for a short time, but the blessing of every second, of every minute, of every hour that she had with that baby was God-given time. When we think about abortion, we think about it being a political issue. It's not a political issue, it's a moral issue. It's in the hearts of men and women. We need to make sure that they understand that what is given to them is given to them by God. God only. God has created what's inside of us. God has created this child, this sperm and this egg that's come together. God has created this union to create this child. So when we think about abortion, it's not about a woman's body. It's not about my choice. It's not about any of those things. It's about the creation of life that God has given. So when we think about what abortion is, it's murder. It's killing. I struggled with coming up with this lesson on how to approach this lesson. One side of me says I can't be harsh about it. But the reality is God says it's wrong. He doesn't directly say that abortion is wrong. What he tells you is that life is of value to him because he created that life. And we need to respect what God has created. We need to understand the blessing that comes from only God. So when we think about this, we have to be in prayer right now. Our country is going to face turmoil once this opinion is released from our Supreme Court on Roe v. Wade. This is not political. This is about God's creation. So when we think about this, we have to be in prayer. We need to be on our knees each and every day praying for those unborn children, praying for those women and men that are making these choices. You know, I could ask right now, raise your hand if you have either been adopted or been part of an adoption. How many hands will go up? Let's raise your hands now. I say that's more than 40% of this congregation has some way, somehow, been part of that. I thank every one of those women that made that choice to endure the pregnancy and to give up that child for someone else to raise. That's God using men and women to take on that responsibility. So when we hear the argument, well, if the church is going to be so uptight about abortion, they need to step up. The churches around this country and around the world are the number one leaders in taking responsibility for those unwanted babies. If you think about this, 1 in 4 women by the age of 45 will have had an abortion. 1 in 4 women by the age of 45, this is just in the United States, have had an abortion. Since 1973, there's been over 1 million abortions a year in the U.S. Think about that. Thankfully, that's gone down a little bit because of the Hyde Amendment. That amendment said no more federal dollars can go towards abortions for people on Medicare. So there's things that are happening, but the church is so important in what's going on right now in society. We need to be out there making sure that people understand the value of life and the preciousness of life. You know, I was talking to a dear friend the other day, and you think about how many women, many maybe sitting here today, that have experienced a miscarriage and the heartbreak that comes from that. You know, up until I've done this study, I always thought about it as, well, it wasn't tangible. It wasn't something that you saw or something that you felt or anything like that. That's what I thought about a miscarriage. How can you be so upset about it? In reality, it was part of you. It was something that God gave you. And it hurt when you lost that. And she told me, she said, you know, when I was sitting in the doctor's office, the doctor said to me, you've had a spontaneous abortion. That's the medical term he put on it. A spontaneous abortion for her miscarriage. She said, I couldn't sit there. I said, no, you can't say that to me. I didn't abort this baby. This isn't my decision what happened. It was a miscarriage. It was God saying it's not your time right now. And that's hard to fathom. She told that doctor, no, don't say that. Say it's a miscarriage. The heart of a child. I can remember as we're sitting there in the, when we found out Melissa was pregnant, you know, we're bumping heads and looking at the little thing as it changes colors, and we're like, you know, scared to death. What's going to happen now? And then as you go to the doctor and you start experiencing these doctor visits, and then they do the ultrasound, and you hear that heart rate, that heartbeat. And you're like, you know, it's amazing. I tried to have a recording of the heart rate or the heartbeat of a 6-week-old embryo child, whatever you want to call it. I'm sorry. But you couldn't get a clear one because you always heard the parents going, "Oh my, that's the baby's heartbeat." And I can remember hearing Cassie's heartbeat and thinking, "Oh my goodness, this is my child. This is something that God's created." Then I can remember the day that Cassie was born. You know, I'm sitting there, I'm watching Melissa, and she's doing all the work, and I'm just standing there, and before I know it, Melissa's mom's got a rag on my forehead, wiping my forehead off, like, "You okay? You okay?" I'm like, "Yeah," you know, scared to death. But when I held that baby in my hands, the beauty that I knew that God created, and He gave me this precious thing called Cassie. God is so good to us. He has blessed us. He has given me this child to raise. Have I made mistakes? Yes. But God is so beautiful and such a blessing to us to give us this opportunity to have these children. You know, when you think about a child as it's been conceived and now it's growing within this woman, and she's feeling all these different emotions and this physical change within our body. At 0 to 2 weeks, the spinal cord grows faster than any other body part. The brain, the ears, the arms begin to form, and the heart forms and begins to beat. Then in 3 weeks, the mouth, the nostrils, the eyelids, all these things start to grow and everything. And they say, "Well, no, it's just a group of cells that's together. It's nothing. It's just a glob. It's just, you know, it's a mass. It's a mass. That's what's growing in you. A mass of cells. It's not really a person, a thing." Then from 9 to 14 weeks, the human profile starts to form. And you know, you guys that have babies now, y'all have the beauty of being able to see what the baby looks like in the ultrasounds and all this stuff. It's amazing the technology that shows you these things. And he goes on, he says, the human profile, it starts to form and everything, sex organs, fingernails, toenails. It can make crying motions, but no sound. And then it'll start sucking its own thumb. That's God creating something within you. That's not just a bunch of cells. That's life. It was just a mistake. I shouldn't have got pregnant. You know, the financial burden this is going to be, I can't do it. It's my body and I'll do what I want with it. I can't afford it. I'm ashamed. There's so many things that women face when they find out they're pregnant. And it could be one of those unwanted situations, just as Becky talked about at her age at 44 getting pregnant. What about the teenage mom, 14 and a half years old, that's pregnant? What about the woman that's married to one man and has a relationship with another and becomes pregnant? What about? These are all things that you hear in society. What about this? What about if it was rape or incest? What are you going to do then, Mr. Preacher, Mr. Christian? What are you going to do? God created it. It's a hard thing to accept, but God created that, which grows inside that woman. We as Christians need to be there to help support and help to encourage, help to pray, help to be with these women that are struggling with these situations. I shouldn't say these women. Women. God created people. We need to be with them. You know, what God says about taking an innocent life is pretty straightforward. When you look at Proverbs 31, starting in verse 8, it says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." Speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. I've heard that for years now. Now I understand it more and more. For that innocent child that's growing within that body, they need an advocate. Are you willing to stand up? Are you willing to stand up and say it's not right to abort, but I'm going to be there to help you? It's easy to condemn somebody saying that you shouldn't do those things, but until you show them how to get through it, walk them step by step on how to get through it, you just keep your mouth shut if you can't do that. It's where the rubber meets the road. And as Christians, that's our responsibility, to point out, to show, and to lead in a Christ-like manner, to show love, to show humility to those who may be struggling with this. In Proverbs 24, it says, rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering towards slaughter. If you say, but we knew nothing about this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay everyone according to what they have done? What are you doing? Yeah, you're opinionated when that young teenage girl got pregnant, or that woman got pregnant out of marriage. What are you doing about it? They deserve our love. They deserve our guidance. They deserve our care. We need to stand up and be there for those women. We need to have the heart of God to encourage them, to lead them, to love them, to show them what God expects. These things are hard to do in these situations when you think about women that are found themselves in a spot like that. It's no good. It's trash. You're not worth it. Did God say that to us when we messed up? When we've fallen short? Did he say, you're not worth it? Just go on, get out of here. You're not worth my salvation. You're not worth my hope. You're not worth my mercy, my grace, my forgiveness. That mother, that single mother, is worth God's forgiveness. That single mother is worth God's love. The expectation of that is that we need to be doing something. Excuse me. When we look at, God formed you. God formed us. We're formed by the great Creator. When we look at Genesis chapter 1, we see God created the heavens and the earth, and everything that He created was good. He created man, then He created woman. It was good. It was His purpose. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, it says, so God created mankind in His own image. As that baby is developing within inside the woman, it is created in God's image. There's value to that. There is precious value to that. That is life that God has given us. And he goes on, he says, male and female, He created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky. And every living creature, that moves on the ground. I created that, he says. I am the creator of all things. All life is what God has given us. Then in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, it says, then the Lord God formed a man, and from the dust of the ground and breathed into it His nostrils, the breath of life. They say, well, with a baby, viability is about, 22 weeks gestation. That's when they're kind of almost a person. No, when it was conceived and these cells come together, that's when it was a person. That's when it was viable to be a child of God. We need to have that understanding that the value of that pregnancy is important, and we need to be there to support those women. In Isaiah 45, listen to this. It says, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat. For He grants sleep to all those who He loves. Children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from Him. That is a blessing. My daughters are a blessing to me. God has given me those children. That blessing that only comes from Him, the beauty in Him. I can't imagine the stress. I can't imagine the struggle that goes on in a woman's mind as she debates whether or not to have an abortion. I can't fathom it. You know, you may not have ever experienced an abortion. You may not have ever known somebody that's experienced an abortion. Or you may have even been the person that paid for somebody to have an abortion. Or you may have been that boyfriend, that husband that pressured your wife or girlfriend into having an abortion. When you think of that, that's heartbreaking. Pressuring somebody to give up a life that God had made. There's guilt, I'm sure, on all parts. I can't imagine the things or the thoughts that a woman may carry after having an abortion. You know, when we think about this, we think about it's unforgivable. That God hates them. That's not true. In Psalms 24, it starts off in verse 1. It says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord, who may stand in his holy place. The one who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not trust in an idol or swear by a false god. They will receive a blessing from the Lord and vindication from God their Savior. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek your face, God of Jacob." Just as we seek God for forgiveness for the many things that we have done in our life, so now we have to understand that those women that have experienced abortion can seek God and seek his forgiveness. And those who may have been part of that, whether it was within paying or pressuring or whatever part they had in a woman's abortion, they too can seek redemption from God. And it's hard to fathom. We want to judge that as something that shouldn't be forgiven. But when we think about our God, he is a loving God, a merciful God, a God that shows grace even to those who kill the unborn. For me as a Christian, I struggle with that thought. But through God's word, I come to the understanding that that's what he desires. And that's something that we as Christians need to understand. Something that we as Christians need to know, that the value of God's creation is important. And that we need to be mindful of those things and to be grateful and just appreciate the blessing that comes from him and him alone. In Psalms 139, starting in verse 14, it says, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together. When I was woven together. I'm trying to find my place with tears in my eyes. Hold on a second. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book, before one of them came to be. Before I was even conceived, God knew me, knew you, and knew every unborn child that has been, because that was God's creation. For us to understand that and fathom that is hard to do. But the greatness of our God is He has created us, He has formed us, He has shown us His beauty. Each one of us is His masterpiece. He has formed us. He has shown us what love is. He has shown us what grace is. He has shown us what mercy is. You know, when I said earlier I was thankful, of a 14-and-a-half-year-old young lady. I say that sparingly as young lady. She's a child. This 14-and-a-half-year-old lady had to make a hard choice. She was pregnant. She was living in foster care herself. She had no home. She had no support. She had no hope. But this young lady chose to go through with this pregnancy. And as she grew, her belly grows, and she's a child at 14 and a half, pregnant, with no hope. As she grows and grows and grows, and she gives birth to this beautiful, beautiful child, that child goes into the same foster home that she's in. And this 69-year-old and 73-year-old couple took in now a 15-and-a-half-year-old young lady with a newborn baby into their foster care. That's God using those two people at that age to take on a very, very difficult task. Well, over time, they tried to, form the mother-daughter relationship, and that just didn't happen. She was too immature to have this child, to raise this child, and they worked together. They tried to do the right things. The dad was actually 18 when he got the 14-and-a-half-year-old pregnant. At 16 months old, this young lady became up for adoption. And I got to meet that young lady. I got to hold that young lady in my arms. The first time I held her in my arms, she hugged me, and she had her arm around my back and was tapping on my back. And all I could think was, this is my daughter. I didn't care that she was black. I didn't care that she came from a young lady that was probably addicted to drugs and all this stuff that was going on in her life. I didn't care about any of that. I cared that God had placed this beautiful, beautiful girl in my arms. And I was able to call her my daughter. That was such a blessing. But I am so thankful that she chose life, chose to give life to this beautiful girl. And I'm also thankful that she gave us a chance to be her parents. What a privilege it is to be given the charge of something God created. Both of my daughters are my daughters. They may not look the same, but they're my daughters. They're part of me. They're who I am. So when you think about abortion and, it's just a political issue, it's not a political issue. It's a life issue. It's a choice issue. It's a choice to give life to something that is so precious that God has created. It's about the only way I can express this. That when you hear these things, fall to your knees and pray to God that people will understand the value of that life. I know things are going to be hard. They're going to be difficult. But they're going to be precious. And to hold that child and to know that that's what God had created is something that none of us can fathom. That creation that's in your hands is so, so beautiful. So today as we talk about this and we think about this, and tonight we're going to pray about this as a congregation, the importance of life. This morning you may be that individual that's struggling and have had this burden within you for years, that you have faced that problem, that abortion issue, or you have pressured somebody or paid for it, or whatever way you were involved in that. You may have that guilt within you, that struggle within you. But God has given us hope. God has given us something precious, this grace, this mercy, this ability to come before Him and ask for forgiveness. You may have that need, and if you have that need, please come forward today. But you know what? He tells us about a new life too. My mind has gone blank. He tells us about a new life. The life that He gives us through baptism. A newness. Something that is great, that is beautiful, that only He can provide. And so we have this challenge. We have this challenge that we have to ask ourselves, am I done with living this life according to this world? And I'm ready to make that change to live for Him, to give Him my life, to allow Him to lead me so that I make the right decisions. That's what we need to be thinking about today And that's the choice that you have to make as we stand and sing. Rob?
Have thine affections been nailed to the cross? Is thy heart right with God? Dost thou count all things for Jesus but loss?